The gunshot that rang out during Reverend Thompson's sermon that Sunday morning in September 1876 changed everything, though it was not the violence that mattered, but rather what happened in the chaos afterward when Colt Brennan looked across the church and truly saw Sarah Matthews for the first time. Sarah had been sitting in the same back pew of the small wooden church in Redemption, Wyoming, for nearly 3 years, ever since her husband Henry had died in a mining accident up in the hills. She wore the same plain gray dress every Sunday, kept her dark blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, and never raised her eyes from her worn Bible, except to mouth the words of the hymns so quietly that no sound actually escaped her lips. The other churchgoers had long since stopped trying to engage her in conversation. The younger women had given up inviting her to quilting bees and socials after months of polite refusals. The older ladies had stopped offering casseroles and sympathy when it became clear Sarah preferred to grieve alone. Even Reverend Thompson had learned to simply nod in her direction, rather than attempt any pastoral comfort she clearly did not want. Nobody ever noticed the quiet widow at church anymore. She had become as much a part of the background as the rough-hewn pews or the simple wooden cross hanging behind the pulpit. Colt Brennan noticed her that morning only because of where she happened to be standing when Jake Sullivan burst through the church doors with a pistol in his shaking hand, drunk and angry about some perceived slight from the week before. Colt had been working the Larson Ranch for about 2 months. Having drifted into Redemption from Montana after a bad winter, had killed most of the herd he had been managing. At 28, he had spent more than half his life working cattle, sleeping under stars, and moving from one town to the next whenever the urge struck him. He had ridden into Redemption with no intention of staying longer than it took to earn enough money to move on, but the Larsons paid fair wages and the work was steady, so he had settled into the bunkhouse and the routine of ranch life without much thought to what came next. Church was not something Colt attended regularly, but Mrs. Larson had made it clear that any man working her ranch was expected to show his face at Sunday services at least twice a month, and this particular Sunday happened to fall on his rotation. He had been sitting 3 rows from the front, half listening to Reverend Thompson's sermon about forgiveness and redemption, when Jake Sullivan kicked open the doors with enough force to send them crashing against the walls. The congregation froze. Jake was known around town as a mean drunk who worked odd jobs when he needed money for whiskey, and caused trouble when he had too much of it. He had been thrown out of the saloon the night before for starting a fight with Tom Peterson over a card game, and apparently he had spent the night nursing his grievances along with his bottle. "Peterson!" Jake shouted, his words slurred, but his aim steady enough as he pointed the gun toward the front of the church. "You cheated me, you lying snake!" Tom Peterson stood slowly from his seat in the second row, his wife clutching his arm. "Jake, put the gun down. This is not the place. You took my money. You marked those cards." Colt was already moving before he made the conscious decision to do so, rising from his seat and stepping into the aisle. His hand instinctively went to his hip where his gun belt would normally hang, but of course he had left it at the bunkhouse. Nobody wore weapons to church. "Jake," Colt said, his voice calm and level, "whatever happened last night can be sorted out, but not here, not like this." Jake swung the gun toward Colt, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "This does not concern you, cowboy." "You are scaring women and children," Colt said, taking another careful step forward. "Whatever Tom did or did not do, this is not how you make it right." For a moment, it seemed like Jake might lower the weapon. His hand wavered, and something that might have been shame flickered across his face. But then Tom Peterson made the mistake of moving, reaching down as if to shield his wife, and Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot went wild, the bullet embedding itself in the wall near the back of the church, and in the chaos that followed, Colt rushed forward and tackled Jake to the ground. The gun clattered across the wooden floor. Women screamed, children cried, men shouted and rushed forward to help Colt restrain the now sobbing Jake Sullivan. It was only after Sheriff Morrison arrived and hauled Jake away, only after the congregation had slowly begun to file out of the church in shocked, whispered conversations, that Colt found himself standing near the back pew, trying to slow the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. That was when he saw her. Sarah Matthews stood pressed against the wall, where she had apparently taken shelter during the confrontation, her hands still gripping her Bible so tightly her knuckles were white. But it was not fear he saw in her face. Her eyes, he realized with some surprise, were a striking shade of blue-gray that reminded him of storm clouds over the mountains. and those eyes were fixed on him with an expression he could not quite read. Not gratitude exactly, not fear, something deeper and more complicated. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he found himself asking. She blinked as if surprised he was speaking to her, and for a long moment he thought she might not answer at all. Then she nodded once, a quick economical movement. "Yes, thank you." That was very brave. Her voice was softer than he expected, but clear, with an unexpected strength beneath the quiet tone. Before he could respond, she had slipped past him and out the door, leaving only the faint scent of lavender soap in her wake. Colt stood there for a moment, aware that something had shifted, though he could not have said exactly what. Then Reverend Thompson was clapping him on the shoulder and thanking him for his quick thinking, and Mrs. Larson was insisting he come to Sunday dinner as a reward for his heroism, and the moment passed. But that night, lying in his bunk while the other ranch hands snored around him, Colt found himself thinking about those storm cloud eyes and wondering why a woman who had supposedly been attending church for years had never caught his attention before. The following days fell into the familiar rhythm of ranch work. Colt rose before dawn, worked cattle until his muscles ached, ate meals with the other hands, and fell into bed exhausted. The incident at church became a story told and retold around redemption, with Colt's role growing more heroic with each telling, until he finally had to ask people to stop making him out to be something he was not. He had simply done what needed doing. Anyone would have done the same. But he found himself thinking about Sarah Matthews at odd moments. When he was riding the fence line, checking for breaks. When he was working with one of the young horses, teaching it to accept a saddle. When he was sitting around the fire at night, listening to the other hands trade stories and jokes. He learned more about her through casual questions that he tried to make sound casual. Mrs. Larson, who loved to talk, was happy to fill in the details over Sunday dinner the week after the incident. Sarah Matthews? Oh, that poor dear. She came to Redemption with her husband Henry about 5 years ago. He had heard there was gold in the hills and was determined to make his fortune. Sarah did not want to come, from what I understand. She had family back in Illinois, a good life there. But Henry was convinced they would strike it rich, so she followed him west like a dutiful wife. Mrs. Larson paused to pass the potatoes to her husband before continuing. Henry worked the mines for 2 years, barely making enough to keep them fed and housed. Sarah took in sewing and mending to help make ends meet. Then one day there was a cave-in. Henry and 2 other men were killed instantly. Sarah was 23 years old and a widow in a town where she knew barely anyone. She never went back to Illinois? Colt asked, accepting the plate of chicken Mrs. Larson handed him. I think she wanted to, but she did not have the money for passage, and she was too proud to write to her family and ask for help. She has a small house on the edge of town, takes in mending and sewing like she did before. Some of the ladies have tried to reach out to her, but she keeps to herself. I think the grief changed her. Those of us who knew her before Henry died say she used to smile more, used to be more social. Now she just goes to church on Sundays and works the rest of the week. It is a sad thing, really. She is still a young woman, probably only 26 now. She should be thinking about a future, maybe finding someone else eventually. But she has built walls around herself so high nobody can get through. Colt thought about that conversation for days afterward. He tried to tell himself it was simple curiosity, nothing more. But he knew he was lying to himself when he found himself volunteering to make the weekly supply run into town the following Thursday, something he normally avoided because he preferred working outdoors to dealing with merchants and crowds. Redemption was a small town, even by Wyoming standards. Main Street consisted of the general store, the saloon, the sheriff's office, a small hotel, a boarding house, the church, and a handful of other businesses. Most of the residents lived in houses scattered around the edges of town or on ranches and homesteads in the surrounding area. Colt had no real reason to seek out Sarah Matthews. He had his list of supplies from Mrs. Larson and his instructions to pick up the mail and a package that had arrived on the stage. But after he had loaded the wagon and completed his errands, he found himself asking the clerk at the general store if he knew where Sarah Matthews lived. The clerk, a young man named Billy, who always seemed eager to gossip, grinned. "The widow Matthews? You interested in paying her a call? I got to warn you, you would not be the first to try. She does not exactly encourage visitors." "I just wanted to thank her properly for being so calm during the incident at church," Colt said, which was not entirely a lie, even if it was not entirely the truth either. Sure, Billy said with a knowing look that made Colt want to punch him. She lives in the little white house on Cedar Street, the one with the blue shutters. Can't miss it. Got a neat little garden out front. Colt almost talked himself out of it 3 times on the walk over. This was foolish. He had no real reason to call on her. She would probably think he was just another man looking for a wife, which he was not. He was a drifter, a ranch hand who would move on when the mood struck or the work dried up. He had no business getting involved with anyone, especially a widow who was clearly still grieving her husband. But his feet kept carrying him forward until he found himself standing in front of a small, well-maintained house with blue shutters and a garden that, even this late in the season, showed signs of careful tending. Late summer flowers bloomed in neat rows, and he could see evidence of a vegetable garden around the side of the house. He knocked before he could change his mind again. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he heard soft footsteps, and the door opened a crack. Sarah Matthews looked out at him with those storm cloud eyes, her expression wary. "Mr. Brennan," she said, and he was surprised she knew his name. "Can I help you?" "I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mrs. Matthews. I was in town for supplies, and I wanted to make sure you were all right. After what happened at church, I mean. I know it must have been frightening." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through his flimsy excuse. But instead of closing the door in his face as he half expected, she opened it a bit wider. "That is kind of you, but as I said at the time, I am fine. You were the one who put himself in danger. I should be asking if you are all right." "I am fine, ma'am. I have dealt with drunk men before. Jake Sullivan is not the first, and probably will not be the last." A hint of something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "No, I imagine not." An awkward silence fell. Colt knew he should make his excuses and leave, but he found himself reluctant to go. "Your garden looks real nice," he said, grasping for any reason to extend the conversation. "Thank you. Gardening helps pass the time. Must take a lot of work to keep it looking so good." "I do not mind work." Another silence. Sarah did not invite him in, but she did not close the door either. She simply stood there, waiting with a patience that seemed infinite. "Mrs. Matthews," Colt heard himself say, "I know this might be forward of me, but would you allow me to call on you sometime? Maybe take a walk some evening when the weather is nice. I am not trying to be presumptuous. I just thought it might be nice to have some company." He watched several emotions flicker across her face too quickly to identify. For a moment he was certain she would refuse, probably politely, but firmly. Then something in her expression shifted. "Why?" she asked, and the directness of the question caught him off guard. "Why?" "Yes. Why would you want to call on me? You have been in redemption for months and never shown any interest before. Nobody ever notices me at church or anywhere else, and I prefer it that way. So why now?" The honest answer was that he did not entirely know himself, but he suspected she would not accept that. So he thought about it for a moment before responding. "Because when I saw you after the incident at church, you were not screaming or crying or falling apart like some of the other women. You were scared, I could see that, but you were holding it together. And when you looked at me, I got the feeling you really saw me, not just some cowboy who had done something halfway brave. I cannot explain it better than that. I just know I have been thinking about you ever since, and I wanted to know you better." Sarah looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she nodded slowly. "Saturday evening," she said. "You may call at 6 o'clock. We can walk to the park if the weather holds." "Saturday at 6, Colt repeated, feeling an absurd sense of triumph. "I will be here. Thank you, Mrs. Matthews." "Sarah," she said quietly. "You may call me Sarah. Then you should call me Colt." She nodded again, and the smallest hint of a smile touched her lips before she gently closed the door. Colt walked back to the wagon, feeling like he had just won something valuable, though he could not have said exactly what. The next 2 days dragged by with excruciating slowness. Colt went through the motions of his work, but his mind kept wandering to Saturday evening. He caught himself wondering what they would talk about, whether she would be as quiet and reserved as she seemed at church. What had made her agree to see him when she apparently turned down everyone else? The other ranch hands noticed his distraction and gave him no end of grief about it. When word got around that he had asked to call on the widow Matthews, the teasing intensified. "You know you are not the first to try, right?" said Jack Morrison, one of the older hands who had been working the Larson Ranch for years. Pete Williams asked her to the church social last Christmas, and she turned him down flat. Sam Tucker tried to court her for 3 months straight and got nowhere. She is not interested in male company, Colt. Best to accept that and move on. Maybe she just was not interested in Pete or Sam, Colt replied mildly. Or maybe she is still in love with her dead husband and always will be, Jack said, not unkindly. Some people are like that. They give their heart once, and that is it. Colt thought about that possibility and decided it did not matter. Even if Sarah could never love anyone else, that did not mean she had to spend the rest of her life alone. Maybe she just needed a friend. Maybe that was all this would ever be, and maybe that would be enough. But he borrowed a clean shirt from one of the other hands anyway, and spent Friday evening scrubbing trail dust from his boots and brushing his hat. Saturday afternoon, he rode into town early, left his horse at the livery, and spent an hour just walking around to calm his nerves, which was ridiculous. He was a grown man who had faced down armed men and angry cattle and storms that could kill a person in minutes. There was no reason to be nervous about a simple walk with a quiet widow. At precisely 6 o'clock, he knocked on Sarah's door. She answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting just inside. She wore a simple dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had pinned her hair up in a slightly softer style than the severe bun she wore to church. She was not beautiful in the conventional way that turned heads on the street, but there was something compelling about her face, a quiet strength in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze. "Good evening, Sarah," he said, and was pleased his voice came out steady. "Good evening, Colt." They walked in silence for the first few minutes, heading toward the small park at the edge of town, where someone had planted trees years ago in an attempt to make Redemption look more civilized. It was a pleasant evening, still warm, but with a hint of the autumn that would come soon enough. A few other people were out enjoying the weather, and Colt was aware of the looks they were getting. Sarah Matthews had been invisible for so long that seeing her walking with a man was apparently noteworthy. "People are staring," Sarah said quietly, and he could not tell if she was bothered by it or simply stating a fact. "Let them stare. Does it bother you?" "I stopped caring what people thought a long time ago." She paused. "But I do not want to damage your reputation. If you are seen with me, people will talk." "Let them talk. I am not doing anything wrong, and neither are you." She glanced at him, and he thought he saw approval in her eyes. They reached the park and found a bench beneath one of the larger trees. The shade was welcome after the walk in the sun. "Tell me about yourself," Sarah said after they had settled. "Where are you from?" "Colorado originally. My father worked cattle, and I grew up learning the trade. After he died, my mother moved back east to live with her sister, but I stayed. This is the only life I know." "Do you miss your mother?" "Sometimes. We write when we can, but it is not the same as seeing someone. What about you? Mrs. Larson mentioned you are from Illinois originally." Something shuddered in Sarah's expression. "Yes. A small town outside of Chicago. My family ran a dry goods store." "Do you miss it?" "Every day." The words came out more forcefully than she seemed to intend, and she looked away. "I am sorry. I should not have said that." "Why not? It is the truth, is it not?" "Yes, but it feels like a betrayal somehow. Henry wanted to come west. He was so excited about the possibilities, the chance to make something of himself. I should honor that. Even if it cost him his life, even if it left you alone and unhappy?" Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You are very direct. I have found life is too short to dance around the truth. If I am being too forward, tell me, and I will stop." She was quiet for a moment. "No, it is actually refreshing. Everyone else in this town tiptoes around me like I might break, or they avoid me entirely because they do not know what to say to a widow. You are the first person in years to just speak plainly." "Then I will keep doing it. Tell me about Illinois. What was it like?" And slowly, carefully, she did. At first her answers were brief, cautious, as if she was testing whether he really wanted to know or was just being polite. But as the evening wore on and he kept asking questions, kept listening with genuine interest, she began to open up. She told him about her childhood, about helping in her parents' store, and learning to read from her mother, who had been a school teacher before marriage. She told him about her 2 younger brothers who she missed terribly, about the church socials and community gatherings that had filled her youth with connection and belonging. "It sounds like you were happy there," Colt said. "I was. I know it probably sounds small and provincial to someone who has traveled as much as you have, but it was home. I knew everyone. Everyone knew me. I had a place and a purpose. Then why did you leave? Sarah looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. Because I fell in love with Henry Matthews, and he wanted to come west. And when you love someone, you follow them, even if it means leaving everything else behind. Did you ever regret it? It was a bold question, maybe too bold, but she had said she appreciated directness. She took a long time to answer. Not while Henry was alive, she finally said. He was a good man, Colt. I want you to know that. He was kind and funny, and he loved me. The fact that his dream of striking gold never came true, that he died in a pointless accident in a played-out mine, does not change the fact that he was a good husband. But after he died, I sometimes wished I had tried harder to convince him to stay in Illinois, or that I had insisted we go back after the first year when it was clear there was no gold to be found. But those thoughts feel like betrayal, so I try not to have them. You are allowed to wish things had gone differently, Colt said gently. That does not mean you did not love him, or that you are not honoring his memory. Sarah looked at him with something like wonder. How did you get to be so wise about grief? I am not wise. I just know what it is like to lose someone, and to carry around guilt and regret. That does not really make sense when you examine it. My father died because his horse spooked and threw him. For years I felt guilty that I was not there, even though there was nothing I could have done. Eventually I realized I was carrying around weight that did not serve any purpose except to make me miserable. How did you let it go? I decided my father would not have wanted me to spend my life feeling guilty. He would have wanted me to live, to be happy. So I try to do that. Some days are easier than others. Sarah nodded slowly. Henry would have wanted me to be happy too, but I am not sure I remember how. The vulnerability in that admission made Colt's chest tight. He had an absurd urge to take her hand, to promise her that he would help her remember, but that would be moving far too fast. Instead, he said, "Maybe we can figure it out together. No promises, no expectations. Just two people trying to find a little happiness in a hard world." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, and Colt felt something shift in his chest that he was not quite ready to name. They walked until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah asked about his work on the ranch, and he found himself describing the daily routines in detail, pleased by her genuine interest. She told him more about her sewing work, about the satisfaction of taking torn or damaged fabric and making it whole again. When he finally walked her back to her house, the streets were nearly empty and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Thank you for this evening," Sarah said at her door. "I enjoyed it more than I expected to." "Can I see you again?" Colt asked. She hesitated, and he could see her thinking it through, weighing risks and possibilities. "Yes," she finally said, but slowly. "I am not ready for anything more than friendship." "Friendship is good," Colt said, meaning it. "How about next Saturday? Same time?" "Next Saturday," she agreed. He walked back to where he had left his horse, feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe years. He did not know what was happening between him and Sarah, did not know where it might lead, but for the first time in a long time, he found himself thinking about the future as something more than just the next job, the next town, the next drift. The following week established a pattern. Colt worked the ranch during the day, putting in long hours that left him tired but satisfied. In the evenings, he found himself thinking about Sarah, about their conversations, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something that interested her. He rode into town on Wednesday with another supply run and stopped by her house with a book he thought she might enjoy, a collection of poetry he had traded for at the general store. She seemed surprised and pleased by the gesture and invited him in for coffee. Her house was small but immaculately kept, with simple furniture and signs of her sewing work everywhere. Scraps of fabric, spools of thread, a dress form in the corner displaying what looked like a half-finished garment. There were no pictures on the walls, he noticed, no photographs or mementos that might have reminded her of happier times. "You have a nice place," he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Thank you. It is small, but it is mine. Henry rented it for us when we first came to Redemption. After he died, the owner offered to let me stay as long as I kept up with the rent. I have thought about moving somewhere bigger, but I cannot afford it, and besides, I am used to it now." They sat at her small kitchen table, and Colt found himself telling her things he rarely shared with anyone, about the loneliness of the drifter's life, about never having a place to truly call home. about the beauty of the open range and the satisfaction of good honest work, but also about the emptiness that sometimes crept in during the long nights. "Why do you keep moving?" Sarah asked. "If it makes you lonely, why not settle somewhere?" "I have never had a good enough reason to stay," Colt said, then wondered if he was being too transparent. Sarah looked at him over her coffee cup, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. Saturday came, and they walked again, this time venturing a bit farther from town to a spot where a creek ran between stands of cottonwoods. They sat on the bank and watched the water flow past, talking about childhood memories and future dreams. Sarah admitted she sometimes thought about going back to Illinois, but had never been able to save enough money for the trip. "What would you do if you went back?" Colt asked. "I do not know. My parents are getting older. They could probably use help with the store. My brothers both have families now. I would be the spinster aunt helping to raise other people's children." She did not sound happy about the prospect. "Is that what you want?" "I do not know what I want anymore. I used to know exactly what my life would look like. Henry and I would strike gold, or he would find good work, and we would build a life together. We would have children, raise them here in the West, where they could grow up strong and free. When that dream died with Henry, I did not have another one ready to take its place. Maybe you do not need to know right now. Maybe it is enough to just live day by day and see what happens." "Is that what you do?" "More or less. I try not to plan too far ahead. Life has a way of changing your plans anyway." "That is certainly true," Sarah said softly. As September gave way to October, Colt found himself spending more and more time thinking about Sarah. Their Saturday walks became a fixed point in his week, something he looked forward to with an anticipation that surprised him. But he also started finding other excuses to see her. He would ride into town after work sometimes, ostensibly to pick up something from the general store or check on his horse at the livery, but really just hoping to catch a glimpse of her working in her garden or walking to the church for choir practice. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but there was affection beneath the ribbing. Even Jack Morrison, who had warned him away at the beginning, seemed pleased that Sarah was coming out of her shell. "She smiled at me in church last Sunday," Jack reported. "Actually smiled and said good morning. First time in 3 years I have gotten more than a nod from her. Whatever you were doing, keep doing it." But Colt was beginning to realize that what he was doing was falling in love, and he had no idea if Sarah felt anything similar. She seemed to enjoy his company, seemed more relaxed and open with each meeting, but she still kept a careful distance, both physical and emotional. She never reached for his hand during their walks. She never invited him to stay for more than a brief cup of coffee, and when he tried to pay her compliments beyond the casual, she would change the subject or deflect with humor. He did not push. He had meant what he said about going slowly, about letting friendship be enough. But it was getting harder to ignore the way his heart sped up when he saw her, the way his whole week oriented itself around their Saturday meetings, the way he caught himself imagining a future that included her in a permanent way. It was late October, with the first real cold snap of autumn settling in, when things began to change. Colt had ridden into town on a Thursday evening after finishing his work early. He had no particular plan except to maybe stop by Sarah's house and see if she needed any help preparing for winter. He knew from their conversations that she split her own firewood and handled all her own repairs, but that did not mean she might not appreciate an extra set of hands. He was walking down Main Street when he heard angry voices coming from the alley beside the general store. Something in the tone made him alter his course to investigate. He found Sarah backed against the wall of the alley, facing down a man Colt recognized as Frank Higgins, a ranch hand from one of the spreads north of town, with a reputation for being mean when he drank. "Come on, sweetheart," Frank was saying, his words slurred. "All I am asking for is a little company. You are wasting away in that house all alone. A woman has needs." "I have asked you to leave me alone, Mr. Higgins," Sarah said, her voice admirably steady despite the fear Colt could see in her eyes. "Please step aside and let me pass." "Not until you agree to have a drink with me, just one drink. What is the harm in that?" Colt did not announce himself. He simply walked up behind Frank and tapped him on the shoulder. When Frank turned, Colt hit him hard enough to send him stumbling backward into the wall. "The lady asked you to leave her alone," Colt said quietly. "I suggest you do as she asked." Frank straightened, his eyes going hard. "This is none of your business, Brennan. I am making it my business. Now you can walk away, or I can hit you again. Your choice." For a moment, Colt thought Frank might actually try to fight, and part of him almost hoped he would. But Frank must have seen something in Colt's eyes that convinced him otherwise. He spat on the ground, muttered something obscene, and stalked off down the alley. Colt turned to Sarah. "Are you all right?" To his surprise, she looked furious. "I had the situation under control. He was trapping you in an alley and not taking no for an answer. That is not under control. I have been dealing with men like Frank Higgins for 3 years without your help," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "I do not need you or anyone else to rescue me." Colt felt his own temper rise. "I was not trying to rescue you. I was trying to help someone who looked like they could use it." "Well, I did not ask for your help. You should not have to ask. When someone is being threatened, decent people step in." They glared at each other for a moment, the tension crackling between them. Then suddenly Sarah's anger seemed to drain away, leaving her looking tired and small. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "You are right. Thank you for intervening. I just hate feeling helpless. I hate that I need protecting." Colt's anger evaporated just as quickly. "You are not helpless, Sarah. But there is no shame in accepting help when you need it. We all need help sometimes." She looked up at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. Without quite meaning to, he reached out and gently touched her cheek, brushing away a strand of hair that had come loose from her bun. "I worry about you," he said softly. "Is that so wrong?" "No," she whispered. "It is not wrong. It has just been so long since anyone worried about me that I do not know how to accept it." They stood there in the alley for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Sarah stepped back, breaking the spell. "Walk me home?" she asked. "Of course." They walked in silence until they reached her house. At the door, Sarah turned to face him. "Would you like to come in? I could make dinner. It is the least I can do after you came to my aid." It was the first time she had offered more than coffee, and Colt knew it meant something. "I would like that," he said. Sarah's cooking was simple, but good, and they ate at her small kitchen table as darkness fell outside. The conversation flowed easily as always, but there was a new undercurrent to it, a deeper intimacy that had been building over the past weeks finally surfacing. After they finished eating, Sarah made coffee and they moved to the small sitting area. Colt noticed a photograph on the mantel that he had not seen before, a formal portrait of Sarah and a young man who must have been Henry. "That was taken just before we left Illinois," Sarah said, following his gaze. "My mother insisted we sit for it. I am glad she did, though I do not look at it very often. It makes me sad." "He looks like a good man," Colt said, because it seemed like the right thing to say. He was, but he was also reckless and stubborn, and too caught up in dreams of glory to see what was right in front of him. Sarah paused. "I have spent 3 years pretending he was perfect because he died, and it seemed wrong to remember his flaws. But the truth is, our marriage was not perfect. He loved me, but he loved the idea of striking gold more, and I was angry at him for that. And then I felt guilty for being angry at someone who died." "You are allowed to be angry," Colt said. "Love does not mean pretending someone was something they were not." Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I do not. I just try to tell you the truth as I see it." She set down her coffee cup and moved closer to him on the small sofa where they were sitting. "Can I tell you something? Anything? I think I'm starting to care for you, more than I expected, more than I thought I could after Henry, and it terrifies me." Colt's heart began to pound. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because caring about someone means you can lose them. It means opening yourself up to that kind of pain again. I do not know if I am strong enough for that." "Sarah?" He took her hands in his, feeling how cold they were despite the warmth of the room. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is uncertain, and death comes for all of us eventually. But I can promise you that, however long we have, I will do everything in my power to make you happy. And I can promise you that you are strong enough. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. I do not feel strong. I feel scared. Being scared and being strong are not opposites. Sometimes being strong means doing things even though you are scared." Sarah looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "I do not know what I am doing. I have not courted anyone except Henry, and that was years ago. I do not know the rules anymore." "There are no rules," Colt said. "We just figure it out as we go." "I am not ready for anything physical," Sarah said quickly. "I need you to know that. If we are going to explore whatever this is between us, it has to be slow. I understand. We move at your pace, whatever that is. She searched his face as if looking for signs of insincerity or impatience. Whatever she saw must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Then yes. I want to see where this goes, but I need honesty from you. If you start to get tired of waiting, if you start to want things I cannot give you, promise you will tell me. Do not just disappear one day. I promise, Colt said, meaning it absolutely. Sarah leaned forward and, very gently, very tentatively, kissed his cheek. It was the first physical affection she had shown him, beyond an accidental brush of hands, and it sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with connection. Thank you, she whispered, for being patient, for seeing me. There is nowhere else I would rather be, Colt said truthfully. He left shortly after that, not wanting to overstay or push for more than she was ready to give. But as he rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. The change in their relationship was subtle but profound. They still took their Saturday walks, but now Sarah would sometimes link her arm through his or sit close enough on a bench that their shoulders touched. The walls she had built around herself were coming down brick by careful brick, and Colt felt privileged to witness it. He started staying for dinner more often, and Sarah began to teach him some of her recipes. They would work side by side in her small kitchen, talking and laughing in a way that felt domestic and comfortable. Colt had never lived this kind of life, had never had this kind of companionship, and he found he liked it far more than he had expected. The people of Redemption noticed the change too. Instead of being invisible, Sarah was now the subject of interested and mostly approving gossip. The widow Matthews was being courted by that nice Brennan fellow from the Larson Ranch, and it was about time she found someone. Some of the church ladies who had given up on trying to befriend her began approaching her again, and to Colt's surprise, Sarah responded. She attended a quilting bee for the first time in years. She volunteered to help with the Christmas pageant planning. She began, slowly, to rejoin the community she had withdrawn from. You are good for her, Reverend Thompson told Colt one Sunday after services. She is coming back to life. It is a blessing to see. But it was not all smooth progression. There were still moments when Sarah would withdraw, when the weight of her grief or her fear would overwhelm her, and she would need space. Colt learned to recognize the signs, to give her room when she needed it, without taking it personally. One evening in mid-November, Sarah broke down crying in his arms, finally releasing years of pent-up grief over Henry's death, over the loss of her old life, over the loneliness and isolation she had endured. Colt simply held her and let her cry, offering no empty platitudes or attempts to fix what could not be fixed. When she finally quieted, exhausted from the storm of emotion, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I am a mess, she said. You are human, he replied, and I am not going anywhere. As winter approached, Colt found himself thinking more seriously about the future. He had been working the Larson Ranch for nearly 6 months now, longer than he usually stayed anywhere. The work was good and the pay was fair, but those were not the reasons he was staying. He was staying for Sarah, for the possibility of something he had never allowed himself to want before. A home, a partner, a life that was about more than just the next job. But with that desire came uncertainty. He had saved some money, but not enough to support a wife. He had skills, but most of them involved working cattle, which meant working for someone else. He had started to think about buying land, maybe starting his own small operation. But land was expensive, and he was years away from being able to afford anything worthwhile. He talked to Mr. Larson about it one evening in late November. John Larson was a fair man in his 50s who had built his ranch from nothing over 20 years. He listened as Colt explained his situation and his concerns. You are worried you do not have enough to offer Mrs. Matthews, John said when Colt finished. I am worried I am just another drifter who will let her down, Colt admitted. She deserves stability. She deserves someone who can give her a real future. What makes you think you cannot give her that? John asked. You are one of the hardest workers I have ever employed. You are reliable, honest, and skilled. Those are not small things. They do not add up to much security, though. John was quiet for a moment, then said, I have been thinking about expanding the operation, bringing on a foreman to help manage the place so I can start slowing down a bit. The job would pay better than regular ranch hand wages, and it comes with a small house on the property. Nothing fancy, but it has got 2 bedrooms and a decent kitchen. The previous foreman lived there with his wife before they moved to California to be near her family. Colt stared at him. Are you offering me the job? I am. You have proven yourself over the past months. I trust you with my stock, and I trust you with my business. The job is yours if you want it. I want it, Colt said immediately. Thank you, sir. I will not let you down. I know you will not. You can move into the house any time. It has been sitting empty for 3 months now. Colt rode into town that evening with a lightness in his chest. He found Sarah working on a dress for one of the townswomen, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she worked tiny, perfect stitches. When she answered his knock and saw his face, she smiled. You look pleased with yourself. I got promoted, foreman at the Larson Ranch, with better pay and a house that comes with the job. Sarah's smile widened. Colt, that is wonderful. Congratulations. It is a small house, he said, suddenly nervous. But it has got a good stove and glass windows and a garden plot out back. And it is on beautiful land with a view of the mountains. It sounds perfect. Sarah, he took her hands, his heart pounding. I know we have only been courting for a couple of months. I know you said you need to go slow, but I need you to know that I am not going anywhere. I am staying in Redemption, and I am staying for you. I do not expect you to make any decisions right now. I just need you to know that I am serious about this, about us. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want to build a life with you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I think I am falling in love with you, Colt Brennan, and it scares me to death, but I do not want to run from it anymore. You do not have to be scared. We will figure it out together. She pulled him inside and kissed him, really kissed him for the first time. It was sweet and tentative and full of promise, and Colt felt something in his chest unlock. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah laughed a little breathlessly. I am out of practice with this. You are doing just fine, Colt assured her. They spent the evening making plans and dreaming about the future in a way Sarah had not allowed herself to do in years. She told him about wanting a real garden again, with vegetables and flowers and maybe some herbs. He told her about his dreams of eventually buying land and running his own operation. They talked about practical things like money and work, but also about intangible things like happiness and partnership and building something that mattered. It was late when Colt finally left, and when he did, he felt like the luckiest man alive. December brought cold weather and the first real snow of the season. Colt moved into the foreman's house and threw himself into his new responsibilities. The work was demanding, but satisfying, and the extra pay allowed him to start saving in earnest. He began to think seriously about proposing to Sarah, but something held him back. He wanted to give her more time, wanted to be absolutely certain she was ready. Sarah seemed to sense his hesitation, and one evening in mid-December, she brought it up directly. You have not said anything about marriage, she said as they sat by her fire, drinking hot cider. I know you are thinking about it. I can see it in your face sometimes. I am thinking about it, Colt admitted, but I do not want to rush you. I have been thinking about it too, Sarah said quietly, and I have been holding back because I am afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I let myself be completely happy, something terrible will happen. Afraid that I will lose you the way I lost Henry. Afraid that I will be devastated all over again. Those are reasonable fears, Colt said. But you could also be happy for years. We could build a whole life together. Are you going to let fear rob you of that possibility? Sarah looked into the fire for a long moment. Henry proposed to me in the spring. We were married in the summer and left for Wyoming in the fall. Everything happened so fast that I never had time to really think about what I was giving up. I just followed my heart. Do you regret that? I regret the outcome, but not the choice. Loving Henry, even though it ended in grief, was worth it. I just needed to remind myself of that. She turned to look at Colt. Ask me. Ask you what? Ask me to marry you, before I lose my courage. Colt's heart began to race. He had not planned this, had not prepared any kind of speech. But looking at Sarah's face, at the vulnerability and hope in her eyes, he realized it did not matter. He slid off the sofa and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Sarah Matthews, I love you. I love your strength and your honesty and the way you are learning to be happy again. I love how you see the world and how you make me see myself differently. I do not have much to offer except hard work and devotion, but I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Colt pulled her into his arms, feeling her heart beating against his chest. This was real. This was happening. After years of drifting, of never belonging anywhere, he had found a home in this quiet widow who nobody used to notice. They decided on a simple wedding in late January, wanting to give Sarah time to prepare, but not wanting to wait too long. The announcement caused a stir of excitement in Redemption. The church ladies immediately began planning, and Sarah found herself caught up in a whirlwind of dress fittings and menu discussions and debates about flowers. "I thought I wanted simple," she told Colt one evening, laughing. "But Mrs. Larson and Mrs. Thompson have other ideas." "Do you mind?" he asked. Surprisingly, no. "It is nice to feel like I am part of the community again, like people care." "They always cared, Sarah. You just would not let them show it." "I know. I was so caught up in my grief that I pushed everyone away. I am trying to make up for that now." Christmas came and brought with it a week of cold weather and heavy snow that kept everyone close to home. Colt spent Christmas Day with Sarah, and they exchanged simple gifts. He gave her a beautiful shawl he had bought from a traveling merchant. She gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, perfectly tailored to fit him. They attended Christmas services together, sitting in a pew near the front instead of in the back corner where Sarah used to hide. Afterward, they had dinner with the Larsons, surrounded by warmth and laughter, and the kind of family atmosphere Colt had not experienced in years. "You two look happy," Mrs. Larson observed as they helped clear the dishes. "We are," Sarah said simply, and Colt loved how easily she said it. January brought preparations for the wedding in earnest. Sarah worked on her dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk that one of the merchants had ordered special for her. Colt worked on fixing up the foreman's house, painting the walls, and making small repairs so everything would be perfect when Sarah moved in. He also wrote to his mother, telling her about Sarah and the wedding. Her response came faster than he expected, a warm letter expressing joy at his happiness and regret that she could not make the journey for the wedding. She sent a brooch that had belonged to Colt's grandmother, asking him to give it to Sarah as a wedding gift. Sarah cried when he gave it to her, touched by the gesture from a woman she had never met. "Your mother sounds wonderful." "She is. Maybe we can visit her next year, once things settle down." "I would like that. I want to meet the woman who raised such a good man." The week before the wedding, Sarah's younger brother Thomas arrived unexpectedly from Illinois, having saved enough money for the train fare. Sarah was overjoyed to see him, and the resemblance between the siblings was striking. They had the same eyes, the same direct gaze. "I had to come," Thomas said when Sarah asked why he had made the long journey. "You are my sister, and I missed your first wedding. I was not going to miss this one." Thomas stayed at the boarding house and spent the days leading up to the wedding getting to know Colt. They went riding one afternoon, and Thomas was direct in a way that reminded Colt of Sarah. "My sister has been through a lot," Thomas said as they let the horses walk. "Henry was a good man, but he was selfish in some ways. He put his dreams ahead of her happiness." "I know," Colt said. "She has told me about it." "I am trusting you not to make the same mistake. Sarah deserves someone who will put her first." "I intend to," Colt said. "Your sister is the most important thing in my life. I will do everything I can to make her happy." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. Welcome to the family." The wedding took place on a cold but clear Saturday in late January. The church was packed with people from Redemption and the surrounding ranches, far more than Sarah had expected. She stood in the small room off the sanctuary, looking at herself in the mirror and marveling at how much had changed in just 5 months. "You look beautiful," Thomas said, appearing in the doorway. "Are you ready?" "I am." And she was. There was no hesitation, no last-minute doubts. She loved Colt and he loved her, and they were going to build a life together. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Thompson spoke about love and loss and second chances. Colt looked at Sarah like she was the most precious thing in the world. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you through good times and hard times. I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to always see you, to always notice you, even when the rest of the world does not. I promise to make you happy." Sarah's voice was just as steady. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though it has been broken before. I promise to build a future with you instead of living in the past. I promise to choose courage over fear. I promise to love you for all the days of my life." When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Colt kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The reception was held in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Sarah danced with Colt, with Thomas, with John Larson and several other men from town who had never known quite what to say to the grieving widow, but who were happy to celebrate the joyful bride. She laughed more that day than she had in 3 years, surrounded by community and love and the promise of a better future. When the sun began to set, Colt and Sarah left the celebration and rode to the foreman's house, now officially their home. Colt carried her over the threshold, and they stood in the small front room, suddenly shy with each other despite everything. "This is it," Sarah said softly. "Our new life." "Our new life," Colt agreed. "Are you scared?" "A little, are you?" "Terrified," he admitted with a smile. "But it is the good kind of scared, the kind that comes with taking chances on something that matters." Sarah moved into his arms, fitting against him perfectly. "Thank you for noticing me. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found you." They kissed, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was the beginning of their life together, and they both stepped into it with open hearts. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Colt had lived alone or in bunkhouses for so long that sharing space with someone took getting used to. Sarah had been a widow living by herself for 3 years, with her own routines and habits. They had to learn to navigate each other's moods, to communicate about everything from finances to feelings. But underneath the adjustments was a deep foundation of love and respect that made the transition easier. They worked well together, whether it was managing the household, or working in the garden, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence at the end of a long day. Sarah continued her sewing work, though she no longer had to take in every job that came her way. Colt's salary as foreman was enough to support them comfortably, and she could be more selective. She began taking on more creative projects, designing dresses for special occasions rather than just doing mending and alterations. Colt thrived in his new role as foreman. He had a gift for managing both cattle and men, and the ranch operations ran more smoothly than they had in years. John Larson made a point of telling him regularly that hiring him as foreman was one of the best decisions he had ever made. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Sarah planted an ambitious garden behind their house, and Colt helped her turn over the soil and build raised beds. They worked side by side on weekends, talking about everything and nothing, learning more about each other with each passing day. One evening in late April, Sarah stood at the stove making dinner when a wave of dizziness hit her. She had been feeling slightly off for about a week, tired and queasy in the mornings, but she had attributed it to eating something that did not agree with her. But as she gripped the edge of the counter and waited for the room to stop spinning, another possibility occurred to her. She said nothing to Colt that night, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong, but the next day she made a visit to Doc Harrison on the pretext of getting a tonic for her fatigue. The doctor was a kind man in his 60s who had been practicing in Redemption for over 20 years. After a brief examination and some questions, Doc Harrison smiled at her. "Mrs. Brennan, I believe congratulations are in order. Unless I am very much mistaken, you are with child." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be at this early stage. I would say you are about 6 weeks along, give or take. You should start feeling better in another month or so once the morning sickness passes." Sarah thanked him and walked home in a daze. She had wanted children with Henry, had grieved the loss of that dream when he died. She had not let herself think about it with Colt, afraid to hope for too much too soon. But now that possibility was becoming reality, and she felt overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. She decided to tell Colt that evening. She made his favorite meal and waited until after dinner when they were sitting together on the small sofa they had bought for the front room. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand. He immediately looked concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect. I am pregnant, Colt. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, as if he had not quite processed the words. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen. "A baby? Are you sure?" Doc Harrison confirmed it this morning. I am due in early December, he thinks. Colt pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. This is the best news. I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents. Are you happy? Sarah asked, even though the answer was obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am grateful. I am all of those things at once. He pulled back to look at her face. How are you feeling? Are you all right? Is there anything you need? Sarah laughed at his sudden anxiety. I am fine, a little tired and queasy in the mornings, but Doc Harrison says that is normal. I just need to take care of myself and rest when I need to. Then that is what you will do. No more heavy work. I will take care of everything. Colt, I am pregnant, not fragile. I can still work. I know, but let me take care of you anyway. Please? She saw the vulnerability in his eyes and understood. He needed to feel like he could protect her and their unborn child. All right, but you have to promise not to treat me like I might break at any moment. I promise to try, he said, which made her laugh again. The news of Sarah's pregnancy spread through Redemption quickly. The church ladies were thrilled and immediately began planning a baby shower. Mrs. Larson started knitting tiny blankets and booties. Even the men at the ranch offered congratulations, slapping Colt on the back and offering unsolicited advice about fatherhood. Sarah found herself embraced by the community in a way she had never experienced before. Women who had given up trying to befriend her when she was a grieving widow now stopped by regularly to check on her and offer help. She attended church socials and quilting bees, no longer the invisible woman in the back pew, but an active, valued member of the community. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Sarah grew increasingly uncomfortable as summer gave way to autumn. Colt was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was tired, if she should be resting. Sarah found it both endearing and exasperating. I love you, she told him one evening when he had asked for the 10th time that day if she was feeling all right. But you need to relax. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am going to be fine. I know, I just worry. I know you do. But your worrying is making me worry, and that is not good for either of us. He took a deep breath and nodded. You are right. I will try to be less anxious. You do not have to stop worrying completely. Just maybe express it a little less often. That made him laugh, and some of the tension eased. Thomas came to visit again in October, bringing a package from Sarah's parents with a beautiful hand-stitched baby quilt and a letter expressing their joy at the news that they would soon be grandparents. Sarah cried as she read her mother's words, feeling the distance between them more acutely than ever. I wish they could be here, she told Colt that night. I wish they could meet you and see the life we have built. Maybe after the baby comes, we can make the trip to Illinois, Colt suggested. When you are feeling up to traveling, I would like to meet them. I would like that too, though taking a new baby on such a long journey seems daunting. We will figure it out. We have time. Sarah's labor began on a cold December evening, 2 weeks before her due date. She had been feeling restless all day, unable to settle to any task. When the first contraction hit, she was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. She gripped the edge of the table and breathed through it, recognizing it for what it was. Colt, she called out, trying to keep her voice calm. I think it is time. He appeared in the doorway immediately, his face going pale. Time, as in the baby is coming time? Yes, you need to go get Doc Harrison. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen. Then he sprang into action, helping her to the bedroom before running out to saddle his horse. Sarah heard him ride off at a gallop and smiled, despite the nervousness beginning to flutter in her stomach. Doc Harrison arrived within the hour, along with Mrs. Larson and Mrs. Thompson, who had both assisted with many births over the years. They shooed Colt out of the bedroom, telling him to wait in the front room and boil water when they needed it. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah had always heard that first babies took their time, but knowing that did not make it easier. The contractions came in waves that left her breathless and exhausted. Mrs. Larson held her hand and talked her through each one. Mrs. Thompson wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. Doc Harrison monitored her progress with calm efficiency. Through the door, Sarah could hear Colt pacing, could hear the anxiety in his voice when he periodically asked if everything was all right. Mrs. Larson would call out reassurances that did not seem to comfort him much. It was well past midnight when Sarah finally felt the overwhelming urge to push. Doc Harrison examined her and nodded. It is time, Sarah. On the next contraction, I want you to push as hard as you can." What followed was the hardest physical work Sarah had ever done. Push after push, contraction after contraction, until she thought she might not have the strength to continue. But then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby crying. "It is a boy," Doc Harrison announced, holding up the red-faced, squalling infant. "And he has got a good set of lungs on him." Sarah fell back against the pillows, exhausted and elated in equal measure. Mrs. Thompson quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered, looking down at her son's scrunched-up face. He had a shock of dark hair and his father's nose, and he was the most perfect thing she had ever seen. "Let me get Colt," Mrs. Larson said, slipping out of the room. Colt practically ran into the room, his face pale and his eyes wide. When he saw Sarah holding their baby, he stopped in his tracks. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" he asked. "We are both fine," Sarah said, smiling. "Come meet your son." Colt approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the baby, his eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect," Colt whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Colt looked terrified at the prospect, but he nodded. Sarah carefully transferred the baby to his arms, showing him how to support the head. Colt stood there staring down at his son with an expression of wonder and love so profound it made Sarah's heart ache. "Hello, son," Colt said softly. "I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to be a good one." Doc Harrison and the church ladies slipped out to give them privacy. Sarah watched as Colt carefully sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby as if he were made of glass. "What should we name him?" Colt asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on anything definite. Looking at her son now, Sarah knew exactly what felt right. "I was thinking about Thomas, after my brother, Thomas Henry Brennan." Colt looked up at her, understanding immediately. "After your brother and your first husband, are you sure?" "I am sure. Henry was part of my life, and that does not diminish what I have with you. Thomas helped me remember that joy is possible after grief. It seems fitting to honor them both." "Thomas Henry Brennan," Colt repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like it. And we can call him Tommy when he is small." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Colt adjusted to life with a newborn. Neither of them had much experience with babies, and there was a steep learning curve. Tommy was a good baby overall, but he had a strong set of lungs and was not shy about using them when he was hungry or tired or uncomfortable. Colt threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else. He got up in the night when Tommy cried, learning to change diapers and rock the baby back to sleep so Sarah could rest. He brought her meals in bed and took care of household chores without being asked. He looked at his son with such obvious love and wonder that it made Sarah fall in love with him all over again. "You are a natural at this," Sarah told him one evening as she watched him walk around the room with Tommy against his shoulder, gently patting the baby's back. "I am terrified I'm going to do something wrong," Colt admitted. "But I love him so much it hurts. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much after knowing them such a short time. I know exactly what you mean." Christmas that year was quiet but perfect. They spent the day at home with Tommy, marveling at how much he had already changed in just 2 weeks. Sarah's brother Thomas sent gifts from Illinois, along with a letter saying their parents were thrilled about their grandson and hoped to meet him soon. "Maybe next summer," Sarah said, "when Tommy is a bit older and traveling will be easier." "That sounds good," Colt agreed. "I would like to take a trip, show Tommy the world a bit. But first, let us just enjoy being a family." Winter passed into spring, and Tommy grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh. Sarah had worried that caring for an infant while Colt worked long days would be overwhelming, but she found she loved being a mother. The tasks that had seemed daunting at first became routine, the sleepless nights became fewer and farther between. Colt continued to excel as foreman, and John Larson began talking about making him a partner in the ranch operation. It would mean more responsibility and longer hours, but it would also mean security and a real stake in something lasting. Colt discussed it with Sarah before accepting, wanting to make sure she was comfortable with the arrangement. "This is a wonderful opportunity," Sarah said. "You should absolutely accept. This is what you have been working toward. But it means I will be working more, especially during busy seasons. I do not want you to feel like I am abandoning you and Tommy. You are not abandoning us. You are providing for us and building our future. I understand that, and I support you completely." So Colt accepted the partnership, and their financial situation improved considerably. They were able to save money and make improvements to their home. Sarah was able to cut back on her sewing work, taking on only the projects that truly interested her. On their first wedding anniversary in late January, they left Tommy with Mrs. Larson for the evening and had dinner at the small restaurant in town. It was the first time they had been alone together since before the baby was born, and it felt both strange and wonderful. "A year ago today, you made me the happiest man alive," Colt said, raising his glass in a toast. "And somehow, you have made me even happier since then. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for noticing me," Sarah replied, "for refusing to let me hide. I could not help but notice you. Even when you were trying to be invisible, you shone." They talked for hours about the past year and about the future, about their dreams and hopes for Tommy, for themselves, for the life they were building together. It was the kind of conversation that reminded them why they had fallen in love in the first place. When they walked home under a sky full of stars, Colt pulled Sarah close and kissed her with all the love and passion he felt. "I love you, Sarah Brennan, more than I can ever adequately say. I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love again." The years that followed were filled with both challenges and joys. When Tommy was 2, Sarah became pregnant again, this time with a daughter they named Emma Rose. 2 years after that came another son, James. Their family grew, and their home was filled with the chaos and laughter that comes with young children. Colt's partnership in the Larson Ranch proved to be a wise decision. The operation thrived, and eventually John Larson retired completely, selling the ranch to Colt and one other partner. At 35, Colt Brennan owned half of one of the most successful cattle operations in Wyoming, a far cry from the drifting cowboy he had been just 7 years earlier. Sarah became increasingly involved in the community, using her skills as a seamstress to teach other women and to create beautiful things that brought joy to people's lives. She also started a lending library in Redemption, donating many of her own books and organizing fundraisers to buy more. It became a beloved community resource, and Sarah felt proud to have created something lasting. They made the trip to Illinois when Tommy was 3, Emma was 1, and Sarah was pregnant with James. Her parents were overjoyed to finally meet their grandchildren and their son-in-law. They spent 2 wonderful weeks there, and Sarah made peace with the life she had left behind. It would always be part of her history, but it was no longer where she belonged. Home was Wyoming, with Colt and their children. On a Sunday morning in early September 1883, Sarah sat in church with her family, watching Tommy try to sit still during Reverend Thompson's sermon, while Emma dozed against Colt's shoulder. Sarah was very pregnant with James, due in just a few weeks, and she felt the baby kick inside her, as if in response to the hymn the congregation was singing. She looked around at the church that had once been a place of isolation and loneliness for her. Now it was filled with friends and neighbors, people who knew her and loved her. She thought about the quiet widow she had been, invisible and grieving and locked away in pain. Then she felt Colt's hand find hers, his fingers lacing through hers in the familiar, comfortable way of long marriage. She turned to look at him and found him already looking at her with a warmth in his eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. He had noticed her when nobody else did. He had refused to stop seeing her even when she tried to disappear. He had loved her back to life, patiently and persistently, until she remembered how to love in return. And now, sitting in the church where their story had begun on that chaotic Sunday when Jake Sullivan had burst through the doors with a gun, Sarah marveled at how much had changed. How much joy could come from tragedy. How life could surprise you with second chances when you least expected them. After the service, they walked home together as a family, Tommy running ahead to chase butterflies, while Colt carried Emma and kept a protective hand on Sarah's back. The September sun was warm, and the Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above them, full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked, noticing the expression on her face. "Just about how happy I am, how grateful I am that you did not give up on me. I could never give up on you. From the moment I saw you, really saw you, I knew you were special. I was invisible to everyone else. You were never invisible to me." They reached their home, the house that had once seemed too small, but that they had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The garden was in full late summer bloom. vegetables ready to harvest and flowers adding splashes of color. It was beautiful and welcoming and full of life, just like the family who lived there. Inside, Colt settled Emma down for her nap, while Sarah helped Tommy change out of his church clothes. Then they all gathered in the kitchen for Sunday dinner, the kind of simple family meal that Sarah had once dreamed of, but never thought she would have again. James was born 3 weeks later, another healthy baby boy with a good set of lungs. Colt held his third child with the same wonder and love he had shown with the first two, and Sarah knew that no matter how many more children they might have, he would never take any of them for granted. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Emma grew into a bright, curious little girl who loved books as much as her mother. Tommy became his father's shadow, always wanting to help with the ranch work. James was the adventurous one, constantly getting into mischief and keeping everyone on their toes. When Sarah was 35, she had one more child, a daughter they named Mary, who completed their family. 4 children, a thriving ranch, a strong marriage built on love and respect and genuine friendship. It was more than Sarah had ever dreamed of having. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colt arranged for the children to stay with the Larsons so he and Sarah could spend the night alone in their home. After a quiet dinner, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. 10 years, Sarah said softly. Can you believe it has been 10 years? Best 10 years of my life, Colt replied, pulling her close. Though I will admit, some days it feels like we have lived a lifetime together. We have, in a way. We have built a whole life from nothing. Not from nothing. We built it from noticing each other when we could have walked past, from taking chances when we could have played it safe, from choosing love even when it was scary. Sarah thought about that, about how different her life would be if Colt had not looked across that church and really seen her, if he had not asked to call on her, if she had not found the courage to say yes. I was so lost when you found me, she said. I did not think I would ever be happy again. And now I cannot imagine being happier. You and the children, this life we have built. It is everything I never knew I needed. You gave me purpose, Colt said. Before you, I was just drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. You made me want to stay. You made me want to build something lasting. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love story and now shone down on the life they had created. Inside the house, the rooms that had once felt so empty were filled with evidence of their family. Toys scattered on the floor waiting to be put away. Small shoes lined up by the door. Drawings and paintings covering the walls created by their children's hands. A life lived fully and joyfully, with all the mess and chaos and beauty that came with it. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Sarah asked. If Jake Sullivan had not caused that scene at church? If you had been sitting somewhere else that day? Sometimes, but I think we would have found each other eventually. Some things are just meant to be. I want to believe that. I want to believe that even after all the pain and loss, I was meant to end up here, with you, with our children. Then believe it, Colt said simply. Because I believe it with everything I am. Sarah turned in his arms to look at him, really look at him, at the face she had come to know as well as her own, at the eyes that still looked at her with love and wonder after 10 years of marriage, at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her when she thought she could never love again, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. I love you, she said. Thank you for noticing me all those years ago. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for letting me in, Colt replied. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who did not know what he was missing until he found you. They kissed then, under the stars, with their whole life spread out before them, and their whole history behind them. A kiss that held 10 years of love and laughter and challenges overcome. A kiss that promised more years to come, more memories to make, more life to live together. The next morning, they picked up the children from the Larsons and returned to the beautiful chaos of family life. Tommy at 10 was already talking about working the ranch full-time when he was old enough. Emma at 8 was teaching Mary at 3 to read, using the same patience her mother had shown with her. James at 6 was trying to train the barn cat to do tricks, a venture that was going about as well as expected. Colt and Sarah stood in the doorway, watching their children play in the yard, and felt a contentment that ran bone deep. No regrets, Colt asked quietly. Not a single one, Sarah replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The years continued their steady march forward. The children grew. Tommy did indeed start working the ranch full-time after his schooling, showing a natural talent for the work that made Colt burst with pride. Emma went off to teacher's college at 18, wanting to follow in her grandmother's footsteps. James proved to be gifted with horses and became the ranch's head trainer. Mary grew into a sweet, gentle soul who loved poetry and music. Sarah and Colt grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated their 20th anniversary, their 25th, each milestone another testament to the life they had built from that first moment in church when a cowboy noticed a widow that nobody else saw. They became grandparents, first to Tommy's daughter, then to Emma's twins, then to a whole flock of grandchildren that filled their home with noise and laughter during holidays and gatherings. The house they had once thought might be too small had been expanded multiple times and now felt just right, able to hold all the love and family that filled it. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Colt took Sarah back to the church where they had first truly seen each other. It was empty on a weekday afternoon, quiet and peaceful. They sat in the pew where Sarah used to hide, invisible and grieving. I sat right here, Sarah said softly, week after week, year after year, trying to disappear. And I sat up there, Colt said, pointing to the pew where he had been during Jake Sullivan's dramatic entrance. Not really paying attention to the sermon, just going through the motions because Mrs. Larson required it. And then everything changed in a moment. Everything changed, Colt agreed. I looked across this room and I saw you, really saw you, and I knew I had to talk to you, had to know you. Best decision you ever made? Sarah teased, even though she knew the answer. Best decision I ever made, Colt confirmed. Even better than becoming a partner in the ranch. Even better than anything else that has happened in my life. Choosing you, choosing us, that was the decision that made everything else possible. They sat in that old church, hands joined, thinking about all the years that had passed since that September morning in 1876, when a gunshot had changed everything. Thinking about the love they had found in the most unlikely circumstances. Thinking about the family they had created and the life they had built. When I die, Sarah said quietly, I want to be remembered not as the invisible widow who nobody noticed, but as the woman who found the courage to love again, as the woman who built a beautiful life with a man who refused to let her hide. When you die, Colt said, his voice equally soft, you will be remembered as someone who made everyone around her better, as a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a partner, as someone who overcame grief and fear to embrace joy. That is your legacy, Sarah. Our legacy, she corrected. We built this together. Together, he agreed. They left the church hand in hand, walking out into the sunshine of a beautiful Wyoming afternoon. Behind them was the past, with all its pain and loss and eventual healing. Before them was whatever future they had left, however many years or months or days. And between them was a love that had started with a simple act of noticing, of seeing someone when the rest of the world looked away. In the years that followed, as they grew old together, as their hair turned gray and their bodies slowed, they never lost that core of connection. They were partners in every sense of the word, facing life's challenges together and celebrating its joys with equal enthusiasm. When Sarah was 60 and Colt was 62, they sat on their porch on a warm summer evening, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered for a family reunion. The noise and chaos were tremendous, and Sarah loved every second of it. Look what we made, Colt said, gesturing to the crowd of family filling their yard. All because I could not stop staring at a quiet widow in church until I finally asked her. Sarah laughed. And all because that quiet widow found the courage to say yes. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had said no? Sometimes, but not in a way that makes me sad. I wonder more about the Sarah I would have been if I had stayed locked away in grief, if I had never taken that chance on you. And I am grateful every single day that I did not become that Sarah. I am grateful for the woman I became because I loved you. I am grateful for you too, Colt said, pulling her close despite the heat of the summer evening. For every day we have had together, for every challenge we have overcome, for every moment of joy, all of it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy play out in front of them, children chasing each other, grandchildren being doted on by their parents, Tommy managing the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown, Emma teaching at the school in town, James training horses and making a name for himself, Mary writing poetry that was starting to get published in magazines back east. This was what love built, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but a steady, faithful commitment to seeing each other, to choosing each other, day after day, year after year. It was meals cooked and dishes washed and children raised and arguments resolved and forgiveness granted and joy shared and sorrows weathered together. It was a cowboy noticing a widow that nobody else saw. It was a widow finding the courage to be seen. It was two lonely people becoming one strong partnership that could weather anything life threw at them. As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape they both loved, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah leaned her head on Colt's shoulder and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For all of this. For being exactly who you are. Thank you for letting me love you," Colt replied. "For building this beautiful life with me." Around them, their family laughed and played and loved, a living testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of loving and being loved, of taking chances even when the outcome is uncertain. And in that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that every painful step of her journey had been worth it to arrive at this place, with this man, surrounded by this family. The quiet widow that nobody noticed had become a woman who was seen and loved and valued by so many. But it had all started with one cowboy who could not stop staring until he finally asked her. And with one widow who found the courage to say yes. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.